to the Jamie Dulaney Plant-Based Wellness Podcast. My name is Jamie Dulaney, and I'm your host. I'm a plant-based cardiologist and endurance athlete living in Southwest Florida. And today I have the pleasure of interviewing an endurance athlete himself, Dean Hall. I came across you on Instagram. We were just talking earlier. I love the outdoors. I try to get my members to get as much sunlight and movement as possible. And I would assume that's kind of how you came up on my feed. But you have a unique story. You were diagnosed with two kinds of cancer, CLL and lymphoma, and decided to pursue your own form of treatment, as you describe very well in your book called The Wild Cure, which is an excellent read. And we'll put a list to the show notes. But you went from being, doctors saying maybe get your affairs in order to I'm going to do this my way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, not as much my way. I just wanted to make sure I advocated for myself because I'd had so many clients I'd watched go through the cancer recovery process. And even if it was absolutely declared as positive, a positive remission, they were left with lifelong results like neuropathy and hardening of the arteries and brain fog and all those things I didn't want to have to live with if I didn't want to, if I didn't absolutely have to. And so that's why I made some of the decisions I did.
And, let's just dive right into it.
Sure.
You had done some swimming in the past and were an athlete. So it wasn't like you were a couch potato and got off and decided I'm going to do this big undertaking.
Right.
But you decided that you were going to do this long distance swim, and the river is help me, Willamette?
Willamette.
Willamette.
You can remember it in two ways. Either Willamette, I swam it, or it's Willamette, damn it.
Okay. I'm sure you said both ways, right?
Oh, yeah, many times.
So it's ended up being about 187 mile swim. And again, we're going to back up to around 2014 when you decided to get back in the water. So tell me, everybody assumes looking at you, you look like the picture of health, you look like an athlete. And, the first thing people always start to say is, well, it's easy for you. You were an athlete, But if you read your book, you weren't in athletic shape back then. And getting in, let's talk about that comeback, getting in that water. How bad was it?
Right. It was the actual swim of the river was, exhausting. You being an athlete and having done Ironmans, you know that the Ironman distance is 3.3 miles, and that's considered a marathon. And I was averaging 10 to 12 miles a day for 22 days. Taking Sundays off, mostly because quietly, I'm such a perfectionist, maybe not so quietly, but quietly, my aim was to do something no one in the history of the world has accomplished without being perfect. And so I figured if I took every Sunday off, it would remind myself that I could accomplish a world record without having to be perfect. And that's one of the things I want your listeners to remember. Even recovery of cancer or health or the fitness regimen, getting your body in shape, doesn't have to, the body does not require perfection. As a matter of fact, if you try to be perfect, you're probably going to be on that roller coaster. But yeah, getting into the actual river was pretty glorious. I started a year before when I got this idea because I was dying of the cancers. I'm 6'1", and right now I'm down to about 10 or 11% body fat, which is pretty good for an old guy. But I weighed 215. And at that time, I weighed 152 pounds.
Wow.
So I was skeletal. And I'd helped many people come back to life as a therapist using Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he found in Auschwitz, of all places, that the more passionate the prisoners were about a purpose, the greater chance they had of overcoming. And it didn't matter how strong they were physically or even emotionally. The resilience came from being tied to a passionate purpose. Well, I was dying in August of 2013, and I just a couple years before lost my wife 15 days before our 30th anniversary to brain cancer. My daughter was now 21, and I didn't want her to become a 21-year-old orphan. And so I thought, man, I've got to do whatever I can to come back to life. And I really, at that point, I was still grieving so heavily, having highly disordered sleeping. I was having 3 to 5 nightmares about her death and what happened afterwards. That I just wasn't sleeping, and so I knew I had to do something. I knew I had to find a passionate purpose, and for weeks, I just couldn't decipher what that would be. And then I ran into a journal that I was forced to keep when I was in sixth grade as a crazy 11-year-old. And I tell everyone I was raised by wolves because I grew up here in Oregon. And in the 60s and 70s, my parents, both of them, my mom and my dad, were mountaineers. And in the 60s, women weren't supposed to do that kind of thing. But my mom, this stubborn, cute little Swede, she mixed it up with the guys, man. She was up there. And, if you talk to any of us in the family, we'll tell you quietly she's way stronger than the rest of us. So I'd grown up watching these people stay in shape. They were the only parents I knew that had two things that all of my friends' parents didn't have. They were crazy about each other. They were very deeply in love and like. And parents in the 60s, that just sadly wasn't the case. And then secondly, we were the only family I knew that had a home gym. We had the old cast iron weights in the basement, and mom and dad would go down, and mom would actually lift because you got to get up those mountains. And so I had this deep history of outdoor activity and being fit. And I didn't know that's what, I mean, I kind of knew, but experientially, my parents modeled such this great example of daily fitness. And so I just thought that's what you did. And so I always did that, and played a lot of soccer. That's what took me to college. And then once that was over, I didn't know what to do. So I went into running. But then very quickly I found triathlons and did those for about 10 years. And that's where my swimming really came into play. I was usually my triathlon experience was really interesting. I'd come out in the top 10 or 15 out of the water in a mass start, and then I'd pass everyone on the bike, and then everyone pretty much would pass me on the run. I could just never podium because the fastest I could go is about 5:30s, 5:45s at my fastest, but most of the time right around 6 to 6:15 splits on the mile, and so everybody it seemed like would pass me, and but it was fun. I really enjoyed it, and I, of course, as you know, did thousands and thousands of miles of laps. And so it just became a part of who I was. And so when I was looking for this meaning, this purpose, I ran across this journal, and it reminded me of the boy I was. I wrote in it, when I get old, I gotta, GOTTA, climb Mount Everest, swim the English Channel. And just this electric shock went through me. I'd forgotten that's all I wanted to do. My parents knew a couple men who were sponsored by National Geographic and sponsored adventures, and I thought, wow, that sounds fun. And then in the name of responsibility, I just pursued other things and became fairly suburban, quite honestly. But that reminded me of those wild dreams. And so even though my doctor not only said no, but hell no, into me getting into a public pool to start training, because my immune system was so depressed, I thought, I'm dying anyway. I actually blurted out, I'm not going to die on a couch watching Wheel of Fortune. If I'm going to die, let me at least die in a pool or something. And he's like, okay. And so I did. And this was 3 years after my first wife died. And it was the first time in 3 years I felt like myself. That muscle memory came just pushing off the wall the first time. I thought, oh, there you are.
Yeah.
And even though I made it, I was so sick that I thought 10 laps is going to be an enormous ask of my body for the first training session. But I'm going to do it. I don't care how long it takes me. 10 or 11 laps takes me 8 minutes or so. It took me over an hour. and then once I got to 10, my dad pushing us to be mountaineers, he'd push us to our end, and then he'd say, okay, do one more. And so I did one more. So I ended up doing 11 that first day, and then every day tried to add just one more lap. And that was my training, and I did that for a year. Pretty soon I'm doing hundreds of laps. Well, not pretty soon, but after 100 days or so. And that was the hardest part of the journey, still being sick, still not knowing if I could develop a team or get everything going, still not really knowing the river well enough to know if it's even possible, and still believing in that dream. But yet putting in the laps. It's extraordinarily difficult to push off the wall, come back. Okay, lap one, 148 to go. It's just, it might sound easy, but it's insanely difficult on the brain, because the brain, especially when you're that sick, the brain's like, what are you doing? This is nuts. And I got used to not telling my family or friends what I was doing, because they would echo that. Yeah. So that's kind of a little bit about my background and what got me there.
Yeah, it was quite extraordinary. Because anybody that's come back to start to swim again, it's just not easy picking up. Even an accomplished swimmer, it's cardiovascular, and if you're sick, it's last thing you want to do is hold your breath. So
Right.
then, I'll push forward. I think it's fabulous that your parents got on board with this, and your
Yeah.
dad became the kayaker, and you guys decided that you were going to do a practice run in the Willamette. I'm going to screw it up every
There you
time.
go. No, that's great.
But in
Willamette.
the river, and one of my favorite parts of the book was you decided that you're going to be this macho man, and you're going to get in the cold water and do it.
Yeah.
And I one of the things that I hate most about swimming is the cold water part. And I've done a little bit of cold stuff, but
Yeah.
I live in Florida for a reason. I grew up in West Virginia,
Oh,
and we
did
used
you?
to wear a lot of clothes when we went out, and I snowmobiled and I skied. But this part about immersion with little clothes on into cold water, it's like, But you decided to jump in the Oregon, waters, and I don't know what time of year it was, but
It was early April.
yeah, so there's just no way in the world that the temperature was what, 40s, 50s in the water or something like that. It
It
was
was 39, because the Willamette's largely a snowmelt river.
oh,
And so, in April, the snow's starting to melt. So it was extraordinarily cold.
and that was, a surprise to you that it was going to be hard to swim 8 miles in freezing waters, and do that on a daily basis for 22 days. And your dad came up with the brilliant idea. What about a wetsuit?
Well, the reason I was avoiding that is, according to the Outdoor Swimming Society, who's headquartered, or was at that time, I don't know if they still are. I've fallen out of love with them. If you wear a wetsuit or anything neoprene, they consider it an invalid swim. They won't count it as a world record. and I wanted this to go in the record books. But then, you know, hypothermic aspiration, and for your listeners, if they don't know what that is, it's when you get so cold that involuntarily your lungs and all of your core squeezes all of the air out of your lungs involuntarily. Um, and it literally feels like you're throwing up air, and you can't get anything back in, and you're freezing at the same time. I've never panicked. That's as close as panic as I've ever gotten in the water. And that was the first practice swim.
So a real confidence builder.
Yeah, not so much, but we'd become really good friends with Travis Williams, who was the head of the Willamette River Keepers and Environmental Association. And I called him up and I told him, man, he was interested to see how the first practice swim went. And he had mapped, he was so intimately acquainted with the Willamette. He had his master's in environmental science from Johns Hopkins, and just quite an outdoorsman, brilliant man. And he'd mapped the whole Willamette. And so we were using his maps. And I told him what had happened. And he said, Dean, is that why you're doing it? You're doing it to get in the record books, or you're doing it to inspire other people to refuse to be defined by their diagnosis? What are you doing here, buddy? He's like, are you really that interested in having little gray-haired old men in London sign off on you? And I thought, oh wow, that's a great way of putting it. And then my dad's like, yeah, put on a wetsuit, you dummy. So I'm like, oh, okay. And we went back that very next week, did the swim, did it easily. Yeah.
So again, one of my Ironman, I've done Ironman Chattanooga several times, and it's actually a downstream swim. And swimming was never my best suit, but when you're in going downstream, it does help. But
Yeah.
you just didn't do a downstream swim. You did a downstream swim through rocks, rapids, things floating. One of the parts of the book, your dad, again, 82 during the time,
He was 79.
70 to 79, talking about the rapids sweeping him around, and he had never been in a kayak. So, I mean, it's now you're trying to stay alive. Your dad's trying to stay alive. Your mom's watching from the sideline, hoping both of you stay alive. And you're trying to do 10 miles a day on average doing all this and not get killed. And then what was it, the second day of the swim, or was it the first day that you bounced off the rock so much that you bruised yourself?
That was in the first 45 minutes
40.
of the 187 miles.
So I mean, you're really starting out good. Hypothermia,
Yeah.
and then you get a wetsuit. And now you're going to bounce off of rocks.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It was class 2.5 rapids, which isn't much in a kayak. But when you're in it without a kayak or a life vest, we had two expert guide boaters the first 6 days because we had several rapids like that, especially the first day we had two over 2 point rapids. And they'd never seen anybody come through it without a life vest. So they told me to take the rescue position where you're on your back and you got your feet up. Problem is that put my rear way low. And man, I'm just hitting all these boulders. And finally I thought, okay, go to your side. And I made it through. But I thought after the first real impact with the boulder that maybe I'd fractured my hip, because I hit so hard and it hurt so bad. Thankfully, when we got to the riverbank, I didn't tell the guides, but I told my dad, I said, man, I took a hard shot. He's like, you okay? And I said, I don't know. And I stood up and I could put weight on it. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm fine. And the type of swimming I do is called total immersion swimming.
Love it.
That way, you hardly use your legs at all because they found that they just create drag. And so I put my head and shoulders deeper and it pops my legs up behind me to create less draft. And then I just barely flick every now and then, my feet. And so I knew that I really didn't need my hips. And so if I could withstand the pain, even if my hip was broken, I could probably keep going. That was my thought.
Well, and the other thing that I thought about during that section was with CLL, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. I thought, well, his hemoglobin is probably not good, and I don't know what his platelets were. So you probably were very high to bruise anyway. So
Oh, yeah.
you didn't have much reserve. I'm sure your doctor would have not, nobody would have wanted to look at your hemoglobin after that, probably. So, and hemoglobin, you carry oxygen. So after 45 minutes, you really decrease your oxygen carrying capacity, most likely. So you really, you gave yourself another rock in your pocket, basically, to start the swim. So again,
Right.
it's not easy.
No.
Um, I think the other thing, so as you went along, and there were, many, I won't give the book away, so everybody will read the book entitled,
Well,
but
spoiler alert, I lived.
yeah, you lived. Yeah, yeah, exactly. You did live, and 187 miles later. But during that, you went from somebody that's going to accomplish this feat to show other people that they can, and then all of a sudden, your relationship with the outdoors changed.
Absolutely. Even as much as I was immersed my whole childhood, because all summer long we were doing nothing but hiking and climbing in the Cascades back in the 60s when very few, I mean, we'd go out, and after we got about 15 miles out, we wouldn't see people for days. And so it's just this idyllic time for me. But even with that, I just still saw all of nature as a resource or a recreational environment. I didn't have what I would call a considered relationship with the outdoors. I saw myself as above all living beings, and as if they were inanimate. And that changed dramatically throughout the course of the time. When I started the swim, day one, it was the Willamette. After about day 3 or 4, it became Big Blue, because I was dancing with it all day long. It was moving me. I was moving with it. I was learning from it. And then day 6, I had just one of the most incredible experiences of my life, where Dad stopped me. We were going through this long, about 1-2 mile corridor that was fairly straight and lined by 100-foot Douglas fir trees. So it
Hmm.
was just this beautiful corridor. And we came by an eagle pair, an adult eagle pair. And as soon as I swam by them, they started circling me. And he stopped me because he thought it was cool that they were above me, circling me, and he wanted me to see it. And of course, Dad being Dad, he's like, "Ah, you probably smell like a big fish. They're coming in after you." And we had a laugh. But as you mentioned with my hemoglobin, I'm wondering, I've always just considered it part of the hypothermia, but I'd have to stop about every 45 minutes. And now you've added another layer of perhaps understanding why every 45 minutes I go into pretty deep hypothermia, where I could feel thrombosis, where my internal organs were banging against my rib cage, and I'd start to slur my words and not think real well. And so we'd stop, and I'd have to get out. Get this, Jamie. I'd have to get out, run in place, and do jumping jacks to warm myself up from the inside out, eat and drink as much as I could without throwing it up, and then get back in and do it again. And I did that 8-10 times a day. But every time I would stop, the eagles would roost. And then I'd get back in, and they'd fly and circle me. This lasted for over 3 hours. And then a newscast, a bunch of a reporter and her cameraman stopped and interviewed me, and they circled us the entire time, and they even noticed it and filmed it. And then as soon as we were done, they kind of swooped down and then took off.
Hmm.
And there was just something that happened in that moment where everything changed for me. I felt connected not only to the eagles, but to the river in a very much deeper way. I knew that my insight had been fairly and will continue to be very limited as to all the beautiful things that are happening in our universe. And as hippy dippy and crazy as it sounds to a clinical therapist, I started hearing the river talk to me, and it continued for the rest of the time.
Mm. Yeah, it is amazing. So you kept going for, what did we say, 22 days,
Right.
and finally you made it. But the end, you come out on the Columbian River, so you come out into this main channel. So here you
Right.
are, you're swimming, and you get your 78-year-old dad in the kayak, and I think there's another person in the kayak watch. You had a plan on getting into the main channel, but it's not like, we're talking big boat ships here, right? At this point,
Yeah, barges.
barges. So yeah, and
Yeah,
so barges
huge barges.
they tend to run over people. So your exit strategy.
We had a great strategy, but as you know, one of my favorite quotes is by Yvon Kennard, the big wall climber who started Patagonia Sportswear. He
Mhm.
said, "It's not an adventure till something goes wrong." So we had quite an adventure. But yeah, the plan was we had two yachts, 50 footers. One was going to take the rest of my family and some of the supporters to watch this last day. One was going to pick me up. And so we got all the way out into the main channel, and there was a large light tower there with a hawk that I didn't know, a hawk up there screaming at me and swooping me. I didn't see it, but Dad's like, watch out. Uh, and The reason we went out that far, about a half mile into the Columbia, is Dad was sure if we didn't go all the way out there and have it documented, somebody'd say, "Oh, you didn't go the whole way." So we did, but the last 10 days, it became a media frenzy. It made the AP. It was on national news, and local news was all over it. There was one news channel that was tracking me 24 hours and letting everybody know where I was. And so it became quite a thing, and it really accomplished what I had hoped. And that was inspiring many cancer patients. It was one of the sweetest times I've ever had in my life, because we'd report when we were going to take off, where we were going to launch from, and where we were going to swim to, and people would show up, and this comforted me. They didn't want me to talk, because I don't, believe it or not, even though I'm talking a lot about myself right now, that's not my style. I don't want to be I don't need to be some kind of hero or anything, but they would come and they'd want me to hug them, and they'd tell me their story.
Mm,
And so for me, it was tailor made for me, because
mhm.
all I had to do was listen and care. But this last day, we were supposed to go way out into the channel. And the reason I tell you about the media frenzy is boats would come by and they'd honk at us and wave and call our names, and we'd wave, and it was just sweet. Well, we're sitting waiting for the yacht to pick us up, but they'd gotten their anchor stuck and they couldn't move. We didn't know that. And so the other one came, and they were thinking about picking us up. Well, this barge was coming from Portland and out into the channel, and it was going to turn our direction. Well, unbeknownst to us, he kept honking, and we're waving. He's honking, and I didn't know it, but it takes a quarter to half a mile for a fully loaded barge to turn. So if we hadn't been able to get out of the way, we'd have been toast. And what makes it even more ironic is uh, this barge lines had just purchased from another barge line, and the barge line they'd purchased, the name started with the C, and so there was this huge 40-foot iron thing that sat above the cab on the barge this huge iron 40-foot round shape. And the current barge line found that it cost too much to take those out. So they painted over the sea with a big smiley face. and, and later I thought, wouldn't it have been ironic if I'd have been killed by a barge with a big
Smiley
smiley
face.
face? Yeah. But anyway, we're sitting there, and the guy in the yacht couldn't get to us because it was by then the barge wasn't that far away from us. And he got on his intercom and he just said, "Swim, dude, swim." They're not saying hi. They're telling you to get out of their way. And Dad is my safety boater. He panicked, turned around, and just took off. And so I did the same. And luckily, the adrenaline, it wasn't that close. I was actually probably about 30, 40 yards away. But there was a film crew on the beach filming this thing. And it looks like the barge just barely missed me. So yeah, it started with a big bang and almost ended with one.
Hit it with a big bang.
Yeah,
Fabulous. Well, congratulations.
thank you.
So you get out of the water, and your doctor was kind of following along. At one point,
Right.
he made you take a day, and because you were just your body fat was dwindling, not like you had much to
He
start
thought
with,
it was
but
probably less than 3%.
yeah. So you have this new diet plan that I haven't seen out on in line anymore, as far as swim 10 miles a day and you can lose weight.
Yeah,
Despite what you eat, and if
right.
anybody that's done a swim workout, I think I'm the most ravenous after a swim workout of any endurance type of event. I used to
Right.
swim before work, training for Ironman, and I would just be starving all morning. I can run in the morning and be fine till noon, but I could not. It was 3 breakfasts after. So you had to be, you're burning tremendous amount of calories. You lost weight, your doctor, but you get out and you go to the doctor for follow-up, and lo and behold, your chronic lymphocytic leukemia numbers normalized.
Not only normalized, but he really couldn't find many lymphocytes at all. He came, he scared me to death. He took forever because he was checking and double checking. His name was, went down to University of California, San Diego, to the CLL center there. And he was considered the world's #3 researcher at the time. His name was Dr. Juanerio Castro, just a brilliant, wonderful man, very caring. He would take, since I was flying down there, he'd take an hour to an hour and a half with me each time. Who does that?
I
And
do.
so, oh, well, yeah, of course you do. Who besides you two? But yeah, I just adored him. But he was gone forever, which made me really nervous because the only time I'd experienced that was when I'd been diagnosed or when my wife had been diagnosed. And so I was getting more nervous, and I was there all by myself. No one was with me. And so that made it even feel a little scarier. And he came in and he said, "Dean, I don't know how to tell you this." And I almost threw up. And he saw my reaction. I just turned white. I started sweating profusely. And he looked up. He says, "Oh, no, no, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I
Good.
don't know how to tell you this. I can't find it. I can't find any, hardly any lymphocytes. Your blood platelets look normal." He said, "If I hadn't diagnosed you myself, I would think you'd been misdiagnosed." Because, as you know, with CLL, the Western medical lore is that once you have it, it never goes away. You just have to manage it. And he said, "I've never seen, in 30 years, I've never seen this happen." Yeah.
Yeah, so fabulous. You still had some evidence of abnormal lymph nodes.
Yeah, quite a bit of evidence. And we both thought, not being compromised by the leukemia, the lymphoma would just dry up and go away. But it did the exact opposite. Of course, I was still really stressed.
Mhm.
I was broke. I was paying off hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical bills because only 2 years earlier, I almost died from viral meningitis. And then I had my wife's doctor bills, still paying those off. And I'd given up my private practice, which was my one form of income. So I was in, a real financial strait by moving, giving up my private practice and moving back to Oregon. And so I think this stress had a lot to do with it. But yeah, the lymphoma went nuts. There were over 70 lymph nodes that he marked and could identify just by feeling around my body. The two greatest of which were underneath my jawline. And then I had what I called my gravel pit right under my clavicle. And then I had what he lovingly called my hockey puck. It was the size and shape of a hockey puck under my right arm. And those all swelled, especially the ones under my jawline, swelled to the point where I could barely turn my neck. And so once again, he wanted to do chemo and radiation. And once again, I said, well, nature healed me once. Could you give me 2 weeks? I'm going to Google everything I can to find out if there's anything that I could try to have nature heal this as well. And he just kind of shook his head and smiled and said, yeah, I'll give you 2 weeks, Dean. But these numbers are starting to get critical, and look at you, you don't look good. And that's a sign. So 2 weeks, in the 2 weeks, I found Dr. King Lee from Nippon University in Japan, his research on what he called forest bathing, taking men with cancer out into the forest to do a very sensory, very mindful walk, maybe even sit and just use all their senses and breathe as they meditate out there in the forest. And he found that there's an essential oil that's emitted from trees in forests called phytoncides. And phytoncides would boost the men's immune system by 50 to 200 times for 2 weeks. Well, I thought, I even told my doctor, I said, I'm not that smart a guy, but if he's taking them out 1 to 2 hours and it boosts them for 2 weeks, if I go out every week for 24 hours, maybe this thing will become exponential and really snowball. And he kind of shook his head. He's like, well, and he says, what are you going to do then? You're not going to do chemo and radiation? I said, no, I'd like to give it 6 months a trial run. And he just said, well, Dean, here are the numbers. And I said, what are the numbers where it gets to the point where it's critical and there's no going back? I need to do something. He gave me those. And I said, okay, if we get to that, I'll do it immediately without complaint, because I'm not non-compliant. I just don't want to do it. I believe chemo and radiation are the atom bomb, and you don't start a battle with the atom bomb. You end a war with that. And so I wanted to keep that as my last ace. And so I said, I'm going to try this for 6 months. And he gave me the numbers and he told me, okay, for a while, I want you to take blood tests weekly because I was that bad. And then as it went, I started getting better. My numbers started going in the right direction. I went to every other week, then once a month. And I started this May of 2015. And by March of 2016, my lymphoma was gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing.
And it was, if not fun, and many times it was fun, it was just such a sensory rich, beautiful experience. And my life had been in such chaos for so many years. I would go out to the same place. I'd go up into the Mount Hood wilderness about 3 miles up, and then about a mile off the trail where nobody was, where I found this what I called happy little grove or hollow of 100-foot pine and fir and cedar. And they just felt welcoming. And I'd hang up my backpacking hammock, sleep all night, and then stay all day meditating. And then I'd end up and get in a glacial stream, do a cold plunge, wash all my worries away, and go home. It became such a treasured practice that I've continued it. I've gone out every Friday for the last 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask what the practice that you still do. And I know that you were contacted by, because you were doing some cold plunges as well in a tub, and
Yeah.
you came across, can't remember exactly the story, but they a guy has a prototype of a cold plunge tub that makes its own ice, makes it so you don't have to, visit the 7-Eleven every morning to get your ice. And so do you do that still?
Yeah, yeah. The world's first cold plunge company, Morosco Forge, was out of Phoenix, Arizona, and I started my first cold plunge on intentionally was January 3rd of 2014. I thought, my body's still really sick, and I'm going to get in this snowmelt river. I better start, I better take 6 months to acclimatize my body. And that's when I found, and this was way before the research was out. I'd never even heard of Instagram at this point. Nobody was cold plunging for fun. And it wasn't a social media, craze by any means. But I got in and I every day for the last 3.5 years before, I carried what I called my 5,000 pounds on my chest. This just torment of grief and loss and loneliness. And I got in this cold water just in my bathtub at home, January 3rd, and only stayed for 2 minutes because that's what I decided I needed to do for the first time. And it wasn't easy, but it wasn't that hard. And I got out and I noticed something was different. And I even looked down at my chest and I thought, oh, that 5,000 pounds is gone. And I didn't know that you get massive boosts of serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, norepinephrine, all those feel good chemicals and flooding in your brain. And so it was so nice to know, not that I wanted to avoid my grief, but man, if I just couldn't get any room from it, all I had to do is get my big old hairy body into a tub and I'd be fine for an hour or two. I'd get a little bit of respite anytime I needed. It was just a neurological knee jerk reaction. And so I've continued that. Yeah. And in 2018, I got on Instagram because I had just a year earlier finished. I went over to Ireland and swam their longest river, became the first person to swim the entire length of the River Shannon to raise money for their Childhood Cancer Foundation of Ireland, and had such a wonderful time, especially with the Irish. They made me look quiet and they made me look fairly domestic because they're so wild and crazy and such talkers. And I just adored them. But so I had been encouraged by people to start trying to develop a social media presence. Ran across their company that had just started. And I was spending $70, $80 going to 7-Eleven, grabbing bags of ice home every day, and was looking for a better plan. And so I saw them, and on a lark, I thought, there's no way they're going to respond to me, but why not try? Hey, I could be your poster boy. Here's why. And they took it seriously, and we became good friends. We really hit it off and have had a great working relationship since. And so they at that time, they're located in Phoenix, Arizona. They'd never done anything outside of Arizona. And so they said, hey, Dean, we'll send you one of our cold water immersion tanks if you give us feedback on how the process went and kind of beta test this thing. And so they did. And it's just been a great relationship ever since. And so I get in, it's the first thing I do every morning. For years, I kept it at 41 degrees, stand 3 to 5 minutes, and now it's at 36 to 38 degrees.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's that. And it doesn't get easier. Every morning, my brain screams, don't get in. You
Don't
don't
do
have to
it.
do
Don't do it.
this. Yeah. But it's been this wonderful, slow resilience training where you just learn to turn the screams down and you get in and you're so glad you did. Within 2 minutes, I have what I call the whoosh, where all of a sudden I can just feel my brain flood. Everything relaxes. I'm not cold anymore. I swear, even my vision gets clearer, and my brain gets clear, and I start the day really happy. Yeah.
Nice. Sounds great. I can, my pool in Florida is probably, I think it's in the 60s right now, and I can imagine, but it's still, I think I'd have to have the dog push me in,
Yeah. Well, follow research.
Oh, I
Uh,
know. There's lots of it's resetting mitochondria, decreasing inflammation. I mean, there is some really good aspects about it. So no, it's not just a torture device. No, it
right.
definitely has merit.
Yeah, but the
Yeah.
research shows it only has to be cold enough to make you gasp. So you don't have to get it, you don't have to have big chunks of ice floating around. It can be, my dad does it.
Mm.
He's now in his 90s, and he does, his mean temperature is like 58, 59. And that's cold to him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so then he stays in a little longer. He stays in about 10 or 15 minutes, but it really helps his pain.
Hmm. Very good. I mean, I think that you're a huge echo to everything. It's funny. I sit here and listen to you, and I'm trying to get people like because there's also benefit of the sun. Getting out. So part of the
Oh,
forest,
yeah.
but the sun itself, and the photons from the sun and how it interacts, and to get some of my members to sit out in the sun for 10 minutes when the sun's coming up in the morning, it's a big deal. So maybe I'll just say, well, let's say if you just get out in the sun, you don't have to get in the ice bath, and maybe
There
that'll
you
be a way
go.
to
Yeah,
or you can do both, but you can try the sun first, and maybe that'll be a good compromise.
sure.
But I think there definitely is something to it. Like I said, I progressed from marathons to Ironman to we started this ultra and kind of backed into
Wow.
it just on a whim. Let's try this thing. But my favorite place on earth, or one of my favorite places on earth, Leadville, Colorado.
Oh,
You go
do you
up.
do the Leadville 100?
I did 25 miles before I timed out. So I've done, so I didn't make it this time. Probably going to try to go back, but you go up, there's one of the climbs is called Hope Pass. I don't know if you're familiar
I'm
with it.
very, yeah, I
And
almost moved to Eagle,
ah,
Colorado, which is very close to Leadville. And I've done a lot of hiking in that area and was hoping to do the Leadville 100 in 89 or 90
uh-huh.
way back with my dad, but we never did.
Well,
But
we'll
yeah,
keep
I
it.
love
We'll
that
keep you
one.
in mind for being a crew.
Oh, I'd love
And
that.
but when you come up and you go when you crest the tree line going up Hope Pass, and you come into this open field and it's just green and there are purple and yellow wildflowers, and you look up and you see the rocks and you see the snow on top of the rocks, and well, the first time I did it I said, if I die right here right now, I know I'm in heaven,
Yeah,
because it's just so breathtaking. And that's where trail running, it's just different. I mean, I run on the roads to train most of the days, but when we get into the woods, there's just something freeing about it. Brings you back to your youth, brings you back, just again being one with nature and hearing things.
true.
And I talk to people about getting out in the morning. I love to be out in the morning when the sun's coming up. I know right when it's getting light enough that the birds start to chirp. I mean,
Mm,
and it's amazing the rhythms of life that we miss by being inside. um,
absolutely.
so I so appreciate you taking time to talk with me. It's been a wonderful
Thank
experience.
you for inviting me.
And I wish you all the luck in the world. And you give so much hope and inspiration to people that you can be in control of your health and your destiny. And your mindset is, and we didn't even get close to that, but your mindset is so much a part of it. If you think you can, you can, but if you think you can't, you probably won't.
Exactly.
And it's just great. So, I wish you the best of luck. I'll keep
Oh,
following you.
thanks.
We'll
Oh,
list you on Instagram so people can follow your experience and see you in the cold water and the book. And again, thank you so much for your time.
thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Jamie.
All right. Good luck. So, what's next? Where are you going? Where are you going to swim next?
Yeah, don't know yet because right now I'm just really working. I've written in the last 2 years 3 different books that are being published. And that culminated in developing a whole new, as pretentious as it sounds, a whole new type of psychology called bio-wild psychology.
Hmm.
And it's everything we talked about. Rather than look at symptoms, I look at how much time people have been outside to recharge.
Oh,
Uh,
it's so powerful. Yeah, I mean, same thing. Again, have you followed Jack Cruz, Dr. Jack Cruz at all?
yeah,
I mean, again, being out, we're not meant to be in these boxes.
no, I've coined a phrase in the last 6 months I call synthetic living syndrome. I
Yes.
think that's why we're all so anxious, depressed, and addicted is because we live in these concrete jungles in cardboard boxes, under artificial
Send
light.
me links when your books come out, please. Keep me posted.
Okay, we'll do.
All
All
right.
right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie.
Take
Take
care. Have a
care.
great day.
You too. Bye bye.